Welcome. This is part 1 to completing the color theory practice worksheets. There are 3 in total, and this first part will be focused on just the first page. So, first of all, write your name, and then you are going to choose one hue for the entire worksheet. So the hues are colors on the color wheels, and I would stick with primary color or secondary color. Your primaries are red, yellow, and blue, and your secondaries are violet, orange, and green. For today, I am going to use green. So I'm going to write that here. And I'm going to use this hue to make and complete all of this first page and the sequential pages that go with this worksheet. So for color theory, there's a couple different properties that are really important. The first part of the color property is the value. That is how light or dark a color can be. For light values, those are called tints. You start with white and then mix your color into it. So you'll notice on this first line, we have 90% white, 10% hue in this box. And then 80% white, 20% hue, 70% white, 30% hue, 60% white, and then 40% hue. Your tints should primarily be white with your color added into it. So let's demonstrate how to do that. So here is my mixing palette, and I have white here in this big container, and I have my green, which is my hue, next to that. Now the first square said to use 90% white and 10% green. So I'm going to take some white and put it into an empty spot. And this is a palette knife. You can use your paintbrush, but when you use your paintbrush to scoop up the paint, you end up getting a ton of paint in your ferrule and up in the top of the bristles and the heel, and none of that paint gets used, so it all gets wasted and then it gets stuck up in your bristles. So it's best not to use that. But if you don't have a palette knife, you can use your brush. Just try not to scoop and get paint all over everything. Just keep it on the toe to the middle of the body of the bristles. Now I don't need to mix a whole lot because it's a really little area, so I'm just going to use this as my 90%. And then I'm going to clean off I'm just going to wipe this on a rag and clean off my palette knife. And I'm going to just take the tiniest amount of green. It's just really like a little pinprick. And I'm going to mix that together. Again, if you don't have a palette knife, you can use your paintbrush to mix. Just try to keep it only on the toe or the very tips of the bristles. This is the toe. Okay, mix that totally. And then you want to be using a flat paintbrush. Okay, this is a flat brush. It's if you look at it on the side, it gets really thin. This is really good for filling in spaces. If you have a round brush, you don't want to use a round brush for filling in spaces. That's for painting lines. So you want something that's flat. And on one of the other pages of this handout, you can see the different kinds of brushes that there are out there. So this is a fairly small, medium size flat brush. You want to use the size brush for the area that you are painting. So here I'm just going to dip in a very small amount of paint, and I'm going to very carefully fill in this entire rectangle, controlling my paint. You notice how I'm moving my hand And you want to try to paint all in the same direction. So this is going to be your lightest tint. I'm not going to make a totally new pile. I'm just going to keep adding more green into what I've already mixed. So this is now 80% white and 20% of the hue. So I'm going to grab some more green, like just a little bit more, and mix that in. And then wipe off the extra on my palette. And then start to fill in that rectangle completely. Move your hand to fill in the space. Try to paint all in the same direction. Okay. And then for the next one, I'm going to again grab like a little bit more green. Mix that into the same pile that I have. Wipe off my palette knife, my paintbrush. Fill that space in. Now, the numbers there, the percentages are just to help guide you, okay? I don't need you to be crazy precise and make sure that you're making it perfectly 70% white to 30% of the hue. The main thing here is that you should see a progression, okay? So it's the lightest on the left, and then it will be getting darker as you go to the right. Okay, last one. Again, I take just a small amount of the green and I mix into that same pile. So it should still mostly be white, or be more white than green. So you always start with white for your tints, and then you add your hue into the white. Okay, last one here. And complete this. Okay. So now I'm going to wash out my brush. I want to make sure all of that white is totally washed out. So I'm rubbing it really good on the bottom of my water container and wipe most of the water out. And then I'm going to dry my paintbrush really good on a towel. You can use paper towels if you have them, but I like to use a cloth rag. I think it works a lot better. Okay, so now you should have your tints completed here. Okay, the next one is the shades. So shades are dark values of a color. You're going to start with your color and then mix black into it. Okay, black is really overpowering, and we want to make sure that we don't have too much black, or you really will not see the color in it. Okay, so here we're going to start with the hue. So about 90% of the hue and then 10% black. So I'm going to start by taking some of my green, putting it into a new pile. new spot on my palette. Wipe my knife clean, just gonna dip the smallest amount of black into that and then mix it all together. And you gotta make sure your brush is clean and dry. And fill in that space. Take a little bit more black, mix that in. Paint your next rectangle. So these are going to be gradually getting darker. Grab a little bit more black, mix that in. And last one, a little bit more black. Mix it really good. And finish this last rectangle. Okay. So now we can see this progression of really light green with all of our tints, and then shades of green that get darker. And when the paint is still wet, it's going to appear to be a little bit darker than it will when it dries. So if you notice that once it's dry and you come back and look at it, it looks like the colors have changed. They will, but just ever so slightly. Colors will lighten up. Okay. Farther down on the worksheet, we have our other property of color theory, which is our saturation. And saturation refers to how bright or dull a color can be. Now, there's a couple different ways that you can lower or change the saturation. One way is to mix in the different tones of the colors, mix different tones, and you mix tones of a color or a hue by adding in gray. So you can dull a color with gray, and you can also dull a color with its complement. Okay, so this first one, we're going to have to make a gray to mix into our hue. So you're going to make your gray by mixing equal parts white and black. So I'm going to do that over here in this compartment. So I'm going to scoop up a good amount of white. And I want to add about the same, always clean your knife before you grab some more paint, otherwise you'll just be mixing it in that palette. I'm not going to grab exactly the same amount of black because like I said before, black is really overpowering and I want it to be like a medium tone gray and not too dark, so I have like 2/3 white and 1/3 black, and I think that's a better mixing, like medium tone gray. So here's my gray. Again, that's about 1/3 black and 2/3 white. Okay, that's mixed pretty well. And I'm going to come down here and read this, and it says, my first tone is going to be about 90% of my hue and 10% of my gray. So again, in a clean spot on my palette, I'm going to scoop up some green and start with green. I don't need a ton. There it is. And then I'm going to mix just the tiniest amount of gray into that. Again, you don't need to strictly follow the percentages. This is just, you should see the progression from one space to the other. Okay. Get my paintbrush, paint in this rectangle. The first one is going to be pretty bright still. So when a color is fully saturated, it has not been dulled at all. It's not been diluted. Okay, next one, I'm going to grab some more gray, mix that in. And paint the next rectangle. And pick up some more gray, mix that in. And last one, a little bit more gray, mix that in. You just want to make sure that when you, for this demonstration, you want to make sure that the color is fully mixed before you put it on your paper. And last one. Okay, and we're going to stop right there, and we will continue on to part 2 of the color theory practice worksheet.